Welcome. My name is Joanna Matoki, and I am the Programs Manager of the Japan America Society of Southern California. We'd like to thank our partners, the National Association of Japan America Societies and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for making this program possible tonight. Just a few quick reminders to our audience. Let me just go ahead and change the screen so you can see what's going on. The audience microphone and videos are off during our program, as well as the chat function tonight. Also, due to our limit on time, we will not have an audience Q&A during tonight's program. We appreciate your understanding. Now, without further ado, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming the JASSC Board Chairwoman, Ms. Mari Miyoshi, to the stage. Mari-san?
Yes. Okay. Good evening from Los Angeles. Today is very hot here. And good morning to everyone in Japan. Also, the situation involving coronavirus has not been resolved. We were fortunate to have the opportunity to host an excellent lecture by our expert tonight on the relationship between US, Japan, and China. I'd like to thank Mr. Kerry, President of the National Association of Japan American Society, and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for their great support and partnership. And thank you to all of our speakers for sharing the perspective with us. Dr. Smith, Dr. Takahara, Dr. Katada, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to speak for us today. And to our wonderful members and supporters, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mari-san. Now I'd like to welcome Mr. Peter Kelly, the President of the National Association of Japan America Societies, to say a few words.
Thank you, Joanna, and thank you, Mari. There are 38 Japan America Societies located all around North America, and the Japan America Society of Southern California is the fourth oldest of those, with a history of over 110 years. The National Association of Japan America Societies, where I work, is a grouping of those 38 societies, and our work is to provide Japan-related programming to our member societies. We offer 6 kinds of programs: one of public affairs, a geostrategy program, 2 business speaker programs, a cultural program, and a security-related program. Tonight's program is called Geostrategy in the Grassroots. It's the Geostrategic program. 4 years ago, NAJAS and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, our partner in Japan, decided that what we ought to do, given the major challenges that the United States and Japan face in Asia, we ought to take the kind of discussion on these issues that happens nearly every week in Washington, D.C., and make it available to audiences outside of Washington. That's the Geostrategy. That's the Geostrategy and the Grassroots program. To this point, we have done more than 30 of these programs in states all over the U.S. And this year we will do 7. This is the first of 8 programs, featuring a speaker from Japan and a speaker from the United States, experts on the geostrategic challenges, but each with a different take. We have a discussion, we facilitate a discussion between those 2. We hope what this does is make people aware of, in a critical time, the important issues that both countries face from a Japanese and a US perspective. Tonight, our speakers, we welcome Dr. Sheila Smith and Dr. Akio Takahara. This is Sheila Smith's 3rd Geostrategy in the Grassroots appearance, the last one being a memorable visit that she and I had to Nashville in the few months before the COVID changed all of our lives. It is the first appearance on Geostrategy in the Grassroots for our friend Akio Takahara, a specialist in China. We think that the discussion this evening will be very interesting, and we hope you enjoy it. We thank the Japan America Society of Southern California for working out this program in a difficult time to organize programs. We thank both of our speakers, who really are the heart of this program, and our partner, the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Joanna?
Thank you very much, Peter. And once again, thank you both to NAJAS and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for this wonderful opportunity. Now I'd like to introduce you to our moderator for this evening's discussion, Good evening and welcome. We're just waiting for everybody to shuffle on in here, and then we'll get started. All right, let's go ahead and get started right on time. Welcome. My name is Joanna Matoki, and I am the Programs Manager of the Japan America Society of Southern California. We'd like to thank our partners, the National Association of Japan America Societies and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, for making this program possible tonight. Just a few quick reminders to our audience. Let me just go ahead and change the screen so you can see what's going on. The audience microphone and videos are off during our program, as well as the chat function tonight. Also, due to our limit on time, we will not have an audience Q&A during tonight's program. We appreciate your understanding. Now, without further ado, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming the JASSC Board Chairwoman, Ms. Mari Miyoshi, to the stage. Mari-san?
Yes. Okay. Good evening from Los Angeles. Today is very hot here. And good morning to everyone in Japan. Also, the situation involving coronavirus has not been resolved. We were fortunate to have the opportunity to host an excellent lecture by our expert tonight on the relationship between US, Japan, and China. I'd like to thank Mr. Kerry, President of the National Association of Japan American Society, and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for their great support and partnership. And thank you to all of our speakers for sharing the perspective with us. Dr. Smith, Dr. Takahara, Dr. Katada, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to speak for us today. And to our wonderful members and supporters, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mari-san. Now I'd like to welcome Mr. Peter Kelly, the President of the National Association of Japan America Societies, to say a few words.
Thank you, Joanna, and thank you, Mari. There are 38 Japan America Societies located all around North America, and the Japan America Society of Southern California is the fourth oldest of those, with a history of over 110 years. The National Association of Japan America Societies, where I work, is a grouping of those 38 societies, and our work is to provide Japan-related programming to our member societies. We offer 6 kinds of programs: one of public affairs, a geostrategy program, 2 business speaker programs, a cultural program, and a security-related program. Tonight's program is called Geostrategy and theGrassroots. It's the Geostrategic program. 4 years ago, NAJAS and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, our partner in Japan, decided that what we ought to do, given the major challenges that the United States and Japan face in Asia, we ought to take the kind of discussion on these issues that happens nearly every week in Washington, D.C., and make it available to audiences outside of Washington. That's the Geostrategy. That's the Geostrategy and the Grassroots program. To this point, we have done more than 30 of these programs in states all over the U.S. And this year we will do 7. This is the first of 8 programs, featuring a speaker from Japan and a speaker from the United States, experts on the geostrategic challenges, but each with a different take. We have a discussion, we facilitate a discussion between those 2. We hope what this does is make people aware of, in a critical time, the important issues that both countries face from a Japanese and a US perspective. Tonight, our speakers, we welcome Dr. Sheila Smith and Dr. Akio Takahara. This is Sheila Smith's 3rd Geostrategy and the Grassroots appearance, the last one being a memorable visit that she and I had to Nashville in the few months before the COVID changed all of our lives. It is the first appearance on Geostrategy and the Grassroots for our friend Akio Takahara, a specialist in China. We think that the discussion this evening will be very interesting, and we hope you enjoy it. We thank the Japan America Society of Southern California for working out this program in a difficult time to organize programs. We thank both of our speakers, who really are the heart of this program, and our partner, the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Joanna?
Thank you very much, Peter. And once again, thank you both to NAJAS and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation for this wonderful opportunity. Now I'd like to introduce you to our moderator for this evening's discussion, Dr. Saori Katada. Dr. Saori Katada is a professor of political science and international relations department. She is also the director of the Center for International Studies and at the University of Southern California. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Katada.
Thank you, Joanna. It's an honor and privilege to be here as the moderator of this very exciting session. And I'm really happy to introduce my two good friends on stage, one from DC and one from Tokyo. So first, I would like to introduce through their bios. The first on, I guess, I don't know if you can see her on the stage, but I would like to introduce Dr. Sheila A. Smith. She is a John Merrill Senior Fellow for Asia-Pacific Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations and is an expert on Japanese politics and foreign policy. She had earned her MA and PhD from Columbia University, and she was at, before coming to a CFR, she was at East-West Center until 2007, where she directed the multinational research team examining the domestic politics of the US military presence in Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. She was a visiting scholar at Keio University, visiting researcher at prominent Japanese think tanks such as the Japan Institute of International Affairs and the Research Institute for Peace and Security, as well as at the University of Tokyo and the University of the Ryukyus. Dr. Smith has contributed extensively to the US-Japan relations, as obviously being introduced by Peter, and as she served on as advisor to various institutions such as Japan-US Friendship Commission, the US-Japan Conference on Culture and Educational Exchange, and the US-Japan Network for the Future Program of the Marine and Mike Mansfield Foundation. She also teaches as an adjunct professor at Georgetown University and serves on the board of Journal of Asian Affairs. She is an author of three recent books. First one, the most recent one, Japan Rearmed, The Politics of Military Power, 2019. Second one, Intimate Rivals, Japanese Domestic Politics and the Rising China. And the third one, Japan's New Politics and the U.S.-Japan Alliance. We welcome her and looking forward to hearing from her. The second on the list, and from Japan, Tokyo, is Dr. Akio Takahara. He is a professor of contemporary Chinese politics at the Graduate School of Law and Politics and the Graduate School of Public Policy, GRASP, that's it's called, at the University of Tokyo. He received a Doctor of Philosophy from Sussex University and was visiting scholar at various places, including the Consulate General of Japan in Hong Kong, Japanese Embassy in Beijing, Harvard University, Peking University, Mercator Institute of China Studies, and Australian National University. Before joining University of Tokyo, he also taught at Oberlin University and Rikyo University. He has served many important research leadership in various places as a president of Japan Association for Asian Studies and Secretary General of the New Japan-China Friendship 21st Century Committee. He was also a dean of the GRASP at University of Tokyo from 2018 to 20. And he currently serves as senior adjunct professor at the Japanese Institute of International Affairs, distinguished research fellow of the Japan Forum of International Relations, and the director of JICA Sadako Ogata Research Institute for Peace and Development. His publication in English includes the Politics of Wage Policy in Post-Revolutionary China, and Japan-China Relations in the modern era. Welcome both, and thank you very much. We are very excited. So, first of all, the kind of question I would like to ask to put the context is about the U.S.-Japan Alliance. This alliance has evolved significantly over the course of last 70 years. And I would like to ask first to Dr. Sheila Smith, how is it seen from the United States, and also later on to Dr. Takahara from Japan. What are the contemporary role of this alliance and its utility? Sheila, please.
Well, thank you, Saori, and it's lovely to see you. I'm sorry that I am not there in person. I'm delighted to be part of the Los Angeles Japan America Society's presentation today too. So, the U.S. Japan Alliance, as you said, has a long history now. We began that alliance way back in 1952. We had a security treaty with Japan after the San Francisco Peace Treaty was signed. And that relationship, of course, came out of the difficult period of World War II and then the occupation of Japan by the US and allies. But I think since then, it has been a remarkable transformation in the partnership between these two democracies. I think, there's many events and milestones that I could point out along the way. But for me, I think the really interesting piece is that, since the Cold War ended, the Japanese and American people have had a far greater affinity for each other, have come together in crisis, as you know, during the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011, but also when we were attacked in 9/11 in 2001. The Japanese government and the Japanese people responded immediately to assist the United States in coping with that attack. So you see, we've come through crisis, we've evolved. Japan has risen to be a global power, a global economic power in that period. There were trade frictions, of course, along the way, but we've really matured as a partnership, I think. And I think today, if you look at the public opinion polling in the United States, Japan is ranked very high as one of America's closest partners in the world. I think you also see in our economic relationship, despite the trade disputes of the past, Japanese companies today are invest in the United States. They're one of the largest sources of foreign direct investment in the United States, with a job creation of about 1 million jobs in the United States. And they are warmly welcomed in communities from as diverse as Indianapolis to Los Angeles to Texas to over here on the East Coast. So Japan is a presence in the United States as much as it's a partnership in a diplomatic sense across the Pacific.
Thank you. Akio? I think your mic is muted.
Sorry, I do this every time. Thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me to this wonderful panel. I'm so thrilled. I wish I was in California in person. In Tokyo, it's still rather cold. We had some snow yesterday, but nevertheless, I'm so happy to be having this discussion with you. Now, on the alliance, I think what I would like to emphasize is the very rapidly changing security environment around Japan. And because of this, the Japanese find that the alliance has never been more important. As you know about the nuclear and missile development in North Korea, the DPRK, and there's the rapid rise in China's military might. I think we'll be discussing this more later. But just to tell you now, China's defense budget is over 4 times larger than that of Japan's. And the Chinese, unfortunately, are believers in power. So they not only rattle their sabers, but the Chinese have started to act and exert pressure. Therefore, this sense of threat that we are experiencing from our neighboring nations, unfortunately, has not been higher before. So under these circumstances, naturally, I would say, the Japanese find the alliance with the United States the most effective means of deterrence to prevent any adventurous and aggressive moves from the two neighbors. And as Sheila mentioned, of course, at difficult times in the past, especially in 2011, when the 3/11, the Tohoku natural disaster, the earthquake and the tsunami happened. The Tomodachi operation implemented by the US forces did tremendous help to the Japanese people, and we never forget that. We appreciate that to this day. So overall, the alliance is so important in the minds of the Japanese people more than ever. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for setting the stage. And it's clear that this alliance is robust and very, very important to both countries. And as Akio already kind of put on the table, topic today is looking at the China factor in this very important alliance between Japan and the United States, and looking at this US-Japan-China triangle. And I would like to kind of discuss this China factor in it. So the first thing to put on the table I would like is what are the kind of crucial issues this triangle is facing in the 2020s. You know, obviously COVID is looming large, but there are many other issues that's being focused. I would like to kind of see how these issues are affecting the region. So I would like both speakers to update us on that. So I would like to first start with Akio, please.
Thank you. I think one of the biggest issues is China's advancement into the East and South China Seas and beyond, perhaps. As I mentioned, they are exerting this physical pressure on Japan, Taiwan, and Southeast Asian nations surrounding the South China Sea. You know, just to cite one example, Chinese Coast Guard vessels entered the contiguous zones around the Senkaku Islands. You know, Senkaku Islands exist at the very southwest end of the Japanese archipelago. And it was in 1971 that China suddenly started claiming sovereignty over these islands. But for a long time, they did not move. But in recent years, especially since the clash 10 years ago, we had over the purchase of the island from a private landlord. That's what the Japanese government did. And Chinese seized that opportunity and started to act, that is to send their Coast Guard vessels into the territorial waters and the contiguous zones surrounding that. And they pester us almost every day. Like last year, the vessels came into the contiguous zones around the Senkakus 332 days out of 365 days. And they intruded into our territorial waters 40 days. That was last year. And I think now there's a lot of reporting about the number of Chinese fighter jets flying over Taiwanese air defense identification zones. This has increased very much. And you know about the construction of the artificial islands and the militarization in the South China Sea. So unfortunately, China is acting to change the status quo by physical force, and by exerting physical pressure, they intend to win without fighting. You know, they are exerting pressure on us and waiting for us to concede, which is according to the traditional Sun Tzu art of war. That's the best way to win a tussle. So this is the situation that we are in.
Thank you. From the US perspective, Sheila?
Thank you. I would repeat many of the points that Akio has already made, but I think it's important to start with, you know, China's economic power has risen substantially. And so there's spillover effects of that economic power that the whole world is facing, Japan, the United States, and all of its neighbors, but also the global economy. But I think the key here to understand is it's not just China's economic rise, but it's also China's ambitions. And I think what we've watched over time, as Akio has pointed out, the Chinese have intent in the East China Sea and the South China Sea to push back on the presence not only of the United States, but any other players who might be encroaching on those waters. So that, of course, gets into territorial disputes first and foremost with Japan over the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea, but also with a multitude of the ASEAN states in the South China Sea. Many of those islands in the South China Sea, their sovereignty is disputed. And China has used force, has used its newfound military power to simply claim those islands and say they're ours and build, as Akio pointed out, military facilities on those islands. So it's very clear that there is no negotiation here with China over the assertion of its claims of sovereignty. China is going to assert that sovereignty by force. But the second piece, of course, is also maritime boundaries. And for those of your audience who are aficionados of international law, of course, the UN Law of the Sea has pointed out places where maritime boundaries must be negotiated between different claimants. And China has not taken that route, even though it has ratified UNCLOS, and has largely asserted its ability to do what it wants in it, where it sees its maritime boundaries as coming, whether that's fisheries rights or other kinds of exploitation of natural resources. So it's not just the military piece or the sovereignty piece, but it's also flouting a little bit the UN Law of the Sea in the way that it asserts its ability to extract resources from the maritime space. The second domain and this dimension, and this is really important, especially recently, because we've seen China kind of up its game in this realm, and that's in terms of using its economic power to coerce its neighbors. And during the crisis with Japan in 2012 over the territorial dispute, China cut off exports of rare earth materials, something that the Japanese industry depends on incredibly for its manufacture of high-tech goods. Similarly with the Philippines, where it had a maritime dispute, it cut off exports, agricultural exports from the Philippines to China. So it uses its economic influence to extract political and other kinds of concessions. The most recent, of course, is we've been watching Australia, which had kind of taken China on the COVID issue and wanted the WHO to investigate the origins of COVID, and China reacted quite viscerally and imposed trade sanctions on Australia because it didn't like the Australian position. So it's not just the hard power side in sense of military, it's also on these economic realms where China is asserting itself. Finally, and I think this is really important, is the human rights dimension. And you're seeing this now as we watch the Olympics. The United States and many other actors have labeled what's happening in Xinjiang as genocide against the Uyghur people. Japan has the Japanese parliament just passed a resolution saying that Japan must raise its voice on human rights issues and mention Xinjiang specifically and the Uyghur people as well. But you've also seen China really assert itself over Hong Kong and really quell or quash democratic practice in Hong Kong, despite its agreement with the United Kingdom that it would allow autonomy in Hong Kong for perpetuity. So I think you're starting to see China behave differently than a decade ago. It's not just that it has more economic power, but now there's an assertion of Chinese interests and a fairly bold assertion that they are going to play hardball if you don't agree with them on a whole host of issues. So I think we're seeing a much more problematic China in the international realm.
Well, thank you, Sheila and Akio. A very comprehensive overview of this China challenge of the last 10 years. So this is the territorial issues, the security type, as well as economic issues and human rights. All of them are posing significant challenge to the region. And I would like to kind of note here too that the trick is that region is so heavily economically interdependent. A lot of economic interest, trade, investment, financial flows are all across this region vis-a-vis the United States and within East Asia too. So I guess it kind of gives a very tricky context. So in that kind of context, and then the next question would be the kind of approaches and instruments that both US and Japan have used to tackle these vital issues. What are the kind of tools, foreign policy, business, whatever, that these countries respectively have in so far tackling this issue and maybe containing it to the extent that there'll be still a peaceful, prosperous region. So I'd like to ask from Sheila first. Thank you.
Sure, let me be brief because I was a little long-winded on the last answer. But you know, the United States, of course, has the hard power. I mean, the United States brings its military power to the region to, maintain open and free oceans and transit through those maritime regions. And I think that's a very important piece of the puzzle, but there's also new other dimensions of American military influence, which is both in cyber and in space. The United States also, of course, extends deterrence to its allies, and first and foremost, of course, Japan. Japan and South Korea, both of our allies in the region, are non-nuclear powers, but are surrounded by nuclear powers, China, Russia, and now obviously North Korea. So we have a pretty strong hard power role in the region to really check or try to check Chinese use of its own military power. But I think there's also other places in the human rights dimension. We have a fairly active incorporation of human rights or values diplomacy in our foreign policy, and that, some people like it, some people don't. But we use tools such as sanctions against entities, individuals who are infringing on human rights or international law. And so that's an important piece of our arsenal as well. I think what's missing for the United States today, unfortunately, is that we have not become engaged in the multilateral trade institutions of the region, most obviously the former Trans-Pacific Partnership that was advocated by the Obama administration, but the Trump administration pulled back on. That regional trade approach, which was a fairly high standard trade agreement, both encompassing environmental protections and labor protections, we have missed that boat, frankly. And now it's called the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. Is that right, Saori? This is your area of expertise. But we're out of the game, right? We're out of the game. And so the original members who've moved on, now there's new members knocking at the door. So the UK, Taiwan, China, Ecuador, they're all knocking at the door asking to come in, and we're not there. And so I think this is an instrument that we must correct. I think we need to remedy this situation, even though our domestic politics are difficult. So those are the kinds of instruments I think we need to be bringing to the picture in the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you. So, so far, Japan has been always kind of noted as something that, kind of piggyback on the US. Does Japan have its own instrument? What kind of tools that Japan has been employing? Are there, instruments that has worked well so far, or what's your view, Akio, please?
Well, I think the very important point has been made by both of you. That is, our relations with China is very complicated. That is, on the one hand, of course, we need to compete with China on many issues, including security and political values. But on the other hand, there is a lot of economic cooperation that goes on. And we benefit, of course, both sides benefit from our economic exchange that we have. So our measures to deal with China has to take care of both elements, right? So first of all, I think I'd like to focus on the competition side of things, and then perhaps in the next round, I'll turn to the other side. But as many of you may know, on the aspect of competition, Japan has a pacifist constitution, as Sheila mentioned, and there are limits to what the self-defense forces can do outside of Japan. But a few years ago, the interpretation of the constitution was changed, and now Japan, under certain conditions, can implement the right of collective self-defense and protect our allies, even when Japan itself is not attacked. So there has been quite a big shift in our policy to meet the needs on the competition front of the relationship with our neighbors. And Japan itself has also been increasing its defense budget, despite the fiscal difficulties that we have. But of course, that's at a much slower pace when compared to China's increase in their defense budget. But at the same time, Japan has also been assisting the capacity building of the coast guards of the Southeast Asian nations. So Japan's trying to increase our capabilities and reinforce our alliance networks. So that's one side of the thing, of the measures that we are taking. I would like to add this increased coordination with the nations of the Quad, the quadrilateral relations, the framework that we have been trying to develop between the US, Japan, Australia, and India. And there are military drills and more communication cooperation using this framework. So that's one side of the things that the Japanese have been trying to promote in our relation when we think about how to deal with China.
Thank you, Akio. So many instruments, and Japan is stepping up on the security side a bit more than used to. I think there are, Sheila already mentioned about some difficulty in the United States kind of coming up to the plate with CPTPP, various kind of trade policies and things like that. Obviously, there are, engaging with China in this, kind of big rivalry. There are kind of factors that shape the U.S. foreign policy, kind of constraints that that is on the plate, and especially given that Biden administration just passed its first year. If you could kind of elaborate for us, what are the kind of ways in which some of the domestic constraints shapes the way that these policies towards China is for the United States.
So I just want to echo one thing that Akio said at the end, if I could, and that is the Indo-Pacific Coalition that's being built. And I think here Japan really took the leadership in laying out the vision. It's called the Free and Open Indo-Pacific Vision, and the Biden administration has echoed that vision. And so I think this is a real opportunity for both Japan and the United States to really find ways to strengthen regional cooperation and capabilities to be able to marshal, to challenge, not necessarily challenge China, but to counter some of the ways in which China is seeking to exert itself. So I would say that's an opportunity, and that's obviously where the Biden administration has placed its priority. I can come back to that later, but some of the challenging issues ahead, I think, obviously for both countries, lie in our domestic politics. And so we when we talk about strategy and foreign policy, we assume that there's no limit. So Saori, it's a great question to talk about the limits. Let me run through a couple of issues where I see you could find some differences within domestic politics in the United States on these issues. I think the China piece today, there's a fairly strong bipartisan assessment, agreement on the assessment that China is our strategic challenger going forward. And therefore we must focus like a laser beam on how to meet this challenge. So you saw it during the Obama administration, you saw it during the Trump administration, now you're seeing it again, the Biden administration. So I think there's not a lot of difference here. What's different between Democrats and Republicans in the United States or on the Capitol Hill and the Congress, for example, is how we should do that. And so I think you'll find some difference of opinion about priorities on the China challenge in the United States. Let me run through a couple of issues that I think, sitting inside Washington, D.C., these are the issues that define us at the moment. And Taiwan, of course, is right up there at the top. What to do? And I think Akio mentioned the Chinese PLA has been upping its coercive pressure on Taiwan, increasing air sorties, in the maritime space that Taiwan would normally think of, not necessarily its territory, but at least its EEZ. So China has been putting the pressure on Taiwan militarily to say, hey, we eventually will be in charge here. And the message is not being missed by Taiwan, by Tokyo, by us, by the Europeans. Everybody has their eye on what China is up to there. But I think there's a fairly strong bipartisan consensus that the United States has the Taiwan Relations Act. We are responsible to assist Taiwan in its defenses. And of course, the Biden administration has just agreed to up that investment in capabilities for Taiwan. There's been a very strong signal, both from the administration and from the Congress, saying openly that we will defend Taiwan if it comes to it, if it comes down to it, if it's necessary. So I think you've got this focus on raising the cost to Beijing of any kind of adventure across the Taiwan Straits. Japan has joined in that kind of diplomatic language as well. On the East China Sea, Senkaku, how do we work on the U.S. Japan Alliance to make sure that the Chinese don't have an opportunity there? I think you also see pretty strong bipartisan support. President Obama, President Trump, and now President Biden in his first meeting with the first Japanese prime minister he met, they reiterated this Article 5 commitment to the Senkaku Islands. So I think we're okay there. Where I think it's a little harder is just the ability of the Biden folks to look outwards and to implement effectively. And I think you're going to see, as we look at the midterms coming up this year in November, of course, the prospect of real change in the political balance in Washington. There's an anticipation that the House will become Republican, lots of Democratic representatives resigning. And so it will be a feistier environment for the Biden folks. And I think what Joe Biden has tried to do is very early on before the midterms is focus as much as he can on the domestic agenda to build back better, the infrastructure bill, the voter rights bill, all of these domestic issues that he thinks he can get past now, because after November, he won't be able to get past. And I think that's what's going to happen is you're going to see more divided politics in Washington after November. You're going to see some serious criticism of the Biden folks, like on Afghanistan and the withdrawal, like on whatever is ahead of us in the next week or 2 or 3 on Ukraine. You're going to hear an awful lot of chatter inside Washington and criticism of the administration, which will put them on the defensive rather than give them the latitude that we probably need in the Indo-Pacific. But I think it's the atmospherics that are going to get worse, I think, later this year. And that could restrain the Biden administration from acting in ways that we can't yet anticipate when it comes to Taiwan or East China Sea issues. But I think it's going to be difficult for the administration to chart a clear path forward on the Indo-Pacific.
No, yeah, very, very insightful to learn about what's going on. A lot of us, outside of Washington Beltway thinking, please, more activist kind of move on the part of the U.S. would be helpful, especially kind of.
But Saudi, I mean, I think that this is something for sure is on the trade side. I don't see us, now after the midterms, before the 2024 election, I don't see us moving on trade. And that's a sad piece of the puzzle, is that missing piece of our strategy is going to be missing for some time, I think.
Yeah, the politics kind of shapes really a lot of that. So on the Japan side, obviously Japanese government is, the LDP or the parties are facing upper house election in the summertime, and Kishida administration, it's been 4 months now, 5 months that been in place. And what shapes Japan's policy, especially engagement with China? What are the constraints? Akio, please.
Thank you. I think domestic politics is very important, not only in the US, but also in Japan, because as I mentioned earlier, our relations with China is a very complex one. There is both competition and cooperation, and we need them both. But what's the right balance? It's very difficult to have a consensus, since those who focus more on the competition side of things say very different things from those who would rather emphasize the cooperation side of the question. I haven't talked so much about the cooperation side of things, but needless to say, China is by far our largest trading partner. And besides economic and business exchange, we have a lot of cooperation in the realm of non-traditional security also, like such as the anti-piracy operations off the coast of Somalia. And there's climate change, there's anti-drug trafficking, COVID, what have you. And but at the same time, there are security concerns, very deep and real, and human rights issues, as Sheila has mentioned, especially the brutal suppression of the democracy movement in Hong Kong since 2019. This has angered the Japanese public very much, because a lot of the Japanese have personal experiences living in Hong Kong, visiting Hong Kong, doing business with the people there. So we were heartbroken. Many of us were heartbroken by the developments there, and that moves politics. Yes, and at the same time, Japan is geographically very close to China. Culturally, we have a long history of exchange and a lot of affinity to traditional Chinese culture. And there's no other way than to find a method to coexist with China. So how to maintain peace with China is the very crucial question that are in the minds of many. But is that possible? We have to find a way. And in order to maintain peace, I think China needs to change. But can we change China? I don't really think so. Only the Chinese can change China, but perhaps we can help the Chinese change themselves. So I would say that dialogue and exchange is extremely important. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we cannot get many Chinese students come over to Japan now. And there are some tricky issues over the students who go into, natural science and high-tech issues are there. So we need to be very careful at the same time. But I think overall, more exchange, more direct contact is so important for mutual understanding, because there's a lot of misunderstanding between the Japanese and the Chinese these days, because we lack the direct contact that we should have. So once the COVID is cleared, it's over. I hope that comes soon. But we have to promote our direct contact. And especially this year is the 50th anniversary of the normalization of our diplomatic relations. So I hope we can make use of this opportunity. But the atmosphere now in Japan, in China is so bad. So we have to think of ways to gradually improve the social atmosphere so that we can resume a normal exchange of people and ideas very soon. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. And very challenging times, but it's great to hear some optimistic or hopeful kind of message. And we hope that things will remain peaceful among this region. So obviously constraints about and issues quite significantly around this region and in kind of facing the U.S. Japan Alliance. But if you could kind of as a overall wrapping up way of thinking about this, think about, so each administration, Biden, Kishida, relatively new, both of them, what are the kind of 3 or 4 main foreign policy priorities that hopefully with the COVID being contained, obviously that's a kind of a big if moving forward, but once the COVID is relatively contained, what are the kind of priorities that you would like to see these respective administration push forward? And how would, within that whole kind of priorities, how would this alliance and the very close relationship between Japan and US play into these priorities? If I can start with Sheila, please.
So thank you, Saori. I think it's just worth reiterating what Akio said and what you referenced as well, is in the COVID era, we are constrained in ways that we would not be constrained otherwise. And, when the Biden administration came into power, the first thing they did is, of course, they had a virtual summit with the Quad leaders. Then the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, and Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, went out to the region. They went to Japan, to the allies first, right, to Tokyo, then to Seoul, then Secretary of Defense Austin went off to India. And then you had this very interesting conversation that happened with the Chinese in Anchorage. And the media was all paying attention, and the Chinese were pointing fingers and very upset. And, there was a little bit of a kerfuffle there, but having gotten over that kerfuffle of the initial meeting, had we not been in a pandemic, I would firmly believe that there would have been subsequent follow-up conversations, even with the strategic competition that we're having. And I think it's like Akio said about Japan. The same is true of the United States. You know, we have a very deep trade and economic relationship with China. We are future interests in global problem solving and climate change and these other issues, very important to find common ground with China. We can't solve these problems without China. And whether it's pandemic management, climate change, maritime stability, you know, the rules of the road, right? All of this requires Chinese participation. And so I think COVID has dealt a difficult blow to diplomacy. I think it's easier to meet with our friends and our allies than it is to meet with adversaries and try to change the direction of what I think all of us are increasingly feeling is a very fraught and difficult relationship. I agree with Akio. I don't know that we can change China. I think, again, that's the job and the responsibility of the Chinese people, but we have common interests with China. And I believe that China too doesn't want to go to war with us or with Japan. I believe that the Chinese feel that the future of free trade is very much in their interest globally, even if they think they want to shape the rules a little bit more than they were able to in the past. So I think there's a lot of latitude here for diplomacy. I think what the Biden folks have done, is they came in domestically here in the United States with a very strong message that the Biden administration would restore American leadership. We would go back to engagement in multilateralism, working with partners, emphasizing our alliances. Alliance first is the way I like to think about the Biden folks, as opposed to the America first emphasis of the Trump folks. But that's an approach, and that's a priority and a style. The reality is the world has sort of moved on a little bit in the 4 years in between the Obama administration and the Biden administration, right? So you have a team that has come in and is trying to restore what they think was lost. But in fact, the world has changed in the interim. And so I think the Indo-Pacific strategy, especially the Quad, is one mechanism, and I think it's a good one. And I think the strategic convergence between Tokyo and Washington here is really quite strong, not just on China, but on the need for coalition building across Indo-Pacific and also with Europe. And this is the unsung story of the last couple of years. And I give Japan an awful lot of credit for accomplishing this, but is to engage the Europeans in some of the issues that are at stake in the Indo-Pacific. UNCLOS, the rules of the road and the open seas, right? The actual global belief in the rule of law, right? The British now are regularly visiting the region, as are the French. Even the Germans sent a ship out to the region, and that ship visited China. So not everybody has exactly the same perspective in Europe, but Europe now is much more a part of and thinking about the future of the Indo-Pacific, which I think is very, very valuable. So I think that coalition building is really, really critical. The problem with a strategy, though, or a set of priorities, Saudi, is that the world can get in the way too. So Afghanistan, that was a huge priority domestically for President Biden, is to get us out of Afghanistan. So did President Trump, wanted to get us out of Afghanistan. So there was a date and a time, and they disagreed, Trump and Biden, but they both agreed we ought to get out. So we watched that happen with some not terribly positive consequences, right? Speaking of being heartbroken, it was very difficult to watch. But now you've got Russia and Ukraine. Now you've got, over in the European theater, you've got this whole other question about European stability and the American role in that. So there's always going to be tugs and pulls, I think, regardless of priorities. I do think the Indo-Pacific remains the focus of the Biden administration in terms of where they want to go, but the world can certainly get in the way. And I think right now, as we are focused on Ukraine, the storyline has shifted a little bit from in the Indo-Pacific. And I think the Biden folks are going to have a hard time reorienting themselves until the Ukraine situation is stabilized.
Well, US is the global power, so that's part of the burden. Yes, thank you very much. Akio, how about Japan?
Right. I very much agree with Sheila that coalition building is so important because, as I mentioned at the outset, the Chinese Communist Party guys, they believe in power, they believe in money also. So the Japanese top priority is to consolidate our alliance with the United States. And I very much agree with Sheila in linking up with the European nations. Also, another area to explore is the Southeast Asian nations. We should further develop our ties with our neighbors in East Asia, especially, I would say, the ASEAN nations, the Southeast Asian nations are very important. And on this basis, Japan also needs to stabilize and develop our relations with China. We have to, as I said, compete but cooperate at the same time. And how are we going to do that? I think the Indo-Pacific actually can be a stage for cooperation. You know, we mentioned FOIP, the Free and Open Indo-Pacific, but let's remember that FOIP has two aspects: the strategic competing aspect and the economic cooperating aspect. And this applies to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative too. The BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, has two aspects: the strategic aspect and the economic development aspect. So if we focus on the strategic aspect, of course, there's no cooperation, there's only competition. But if we focus on the other side, there's a lot of room for cooperation. So if you remember, when Mr. Abe, when he was Prime Minister, visited China in 2018, 52 MOUs were signed for cooperation between Japan and China in a third nation. That is literally, you know, in the cooperation between the Free and Open Indo-Pacific and the BRI. I liken these concepts to a constellation in the sky. You know, the constellation is just a concept, it's just an image. I don't think anybody has seen a constellation because it doesn't exist. What exists, what's tangible are the stars, the projects, and if they are good projects, we can cooperate with them. Like Abe proposed 4 conditions for cooperation with the FOIP projects. So we are hoping that in the future, Xi Jinping will say the same. On certain conditions, the Chinese can cooperate with the Free and Open Indo-Pacific projects on the ground. But first of all, we should present the countries in the region with alternatives. And in this, Japan and the US should lead the way. First, Japan and US should have a very symbolic cooperative project, perhaps in the Mekong or wherever. Southeast Asia, I think, is a very good target for this, but we should show to the countries in the region that there are alternatives and we are ready to provide them. Thank you.
Thank you, wonderful. So I hear that coalition building is important, and also this kind of, well, China calls it win-win most of the time. So we call it positive sum, or the kind of collaboration that will benefit the region as well as all the participants involved. So we only have a few minutes left. I would like to kind of give the full kind of a little bit time just to wrap up. You know, we had started talking about the U.S.-Japan Alliance of the last 70 years, and many challenges that we see from China's rise and its kind of actions. While I hear quite a bit of hopeful signs that there are a lot of spaces for cooperation and understanding. So given that, if you can kind of say a few last words from Sheila, just to wrap up, and maybe message to people. You know, I think most of the audiences are from Los Angeles. If you have any message for those who are listening as you close, thank you.
Thank you, Saori. I didn't quite think about tailoring it for Los Angeles, but what I love about being in Los Angeles when I have the opportunity to get there is the different mindset that people have there towards the Asia Pacific, or the Indo-Pacific as we now call it. And I think that's a really, there's a multicultural engagement with the region, first of all, and second of all, the economic dynamics of the region are seen quite differently than they might be seen from inside the Beltway over here. And so I appreciate the fact that we are not going to, we being the United States and Japan, will need both the government and the private sector citizen to citizen engagement as we look out at the region going forward. If we want to avoid war, if we want to really focus on mutual prosperity, if we want to find common ground on what we can do together with China, then it's going to take all of our resources. And those resources are not just the government here in Washington. Those resources are the resources that are sitting there in Los Angeles, both cultural, economic, trade, foreign direct investment, arts, cultural. I mean the whole gamut. And your students, the next generation of Americans need to be engaged in the region and understand and learn the languages and go there and be part of the problem-solving enterprise. So that's my writ large piece for Los Angeles. But I think there's a couple of things for the United States and Japan to think about. I think 2022 is going to be a very interesting year for the alliance, for the very traditional notion of our alliance, which is the military alliance. Japan is about to, as Akio said, up its defense spending. And it's also on the threshold of a pretty significant conversation and decision about military capabilities. This is the conventional strike conversation in Tokyo, which is whether or not the time has come for Japan to have the ability to reach out and touch, so to speak, its neighbors and to deter aggression by acquiring that capability. And I think there's a pretty forward-leaning conversation, not only in Tokyo, but also in Washington about it. The time has come to give the Japanese self-defense forces a little bit more teeth in this balancing act in the region, in the military balance. So that's a very significant year for the alliance. Of course, the decisions will be made in Tokyo, but I think they have implications, obviously, for the alliance. I think on the economic side, even though I would love us to be raising our hand and being the fourth, fifth country, whatever number we are, to join the CPTPP, I don't see it, but there are things we can do in the trade space. And Saori, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but digital trade, right? There's a lot that we could do together, largely in the energy field, in terms of ensuring supply and managing the markets on the energy side, absolutely crucial for Asia. So there's a lot, and then as Akio pointed out in his comments, infrastructure. I like the idea of a model U.S.-Japan project that demonstrates how it ought to be done, both in terms of quality, but also in equity and fairness. So I think there's a lot here we could come together on that would be the foundational aspects of the prosperity of the region and our own national economic interest. And then finally, it's just, we're saying the same thing over and over, but I'll say it just because we should. We have a lot of coalition partners in and across the Indo-Pacific. I think that's a place where Japan and the United States can only benefit from building the opportunity to work together with others in the region. So be it in economic, be it in cultural, educational spheres, be it in the basic hard power alliance issues, I think we've got a lot of work we can do and a lot of opportunity for both of our countries to do it together.
Great, Sheila. Akio?
Yes, thank you. I shall be brief. My message to the people in LA is, first of all, thank you so much for hosting Shohei Ohtani. The point is, the importance of people-to-people relations, multiculturalism, especially when the state-to-state relationships are having difficulties. Still, it's so important that societies, exchange with each other and try to see the reality of the people and society on the other side of the seas. So in this context, I think the US, the Californian people, the people in LA are showing very good examples to the rest of the world. It should be the way. And I hope, even between Japan and China, we have very similar issues. That's, I think, what we all found out. Japan and the US have very similar problems and challenges. So let's communicate with each other even better. So I really thank the organizers for hosting such a wonderful event. And I'm pretty sure that these events are so important to promote our mutual understanding and communication. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Akio and Sheila. This has been so rich and insightful discussion. Learned a lot and enjoyed it very much. Thank you again. And I would like to give the floor back to Joanna. And I hope we can do it again soon.
Thank you, Dr. Katada. And thank you, Dr. Smith and Dr. Takahara, for such an engaging discussion. I want to thank our partners once again, NAJAS and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, for making tonight's event possible. If you have a moment following this program, please let us know how we did on our post-event survey. Once this webinar closes, it should automatically take you to our survey page. Your comments and feedback will help us continue to host meaningful programs like this one. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and we wish you all a wonderful rest of your week and lovely weekend. Good night. Thank you.